Hi, and welcome to our mini demo for picking a winner using Transparent Choice software. We're going to show you how you can use the process and an AHP model working together in order to simplify and improve your decision-making process when you need to pick one option out of an array of alternatives. The demo I'm going to share with you today is around setting up a data warehouse, picking from one of the many options available in the marketplace in order to create a world-class data solution. But before we dive in the AHP model, which is the way I'd normally start, we're going to look at the process. And the process is going to strip out what we've called gating factors, some basic considerations that just have to be in place, hygiene factors, in order to allow a candidate to be worthy of being assessed. We're then going to apply the AHP model. We're then going to look at some final overlays for risk and for cost. And you'll see, hopefully, in the approach why those are best off outside the AHP model as separate factors to support the final consideration. So the gating factors. So every sector is different. I've applied some very simple gating factors to the 7 slightly silly named alternatives I've put in here. So my 3 gating factors is around the data center location. So there are some data privacy implications around where your data center is based. I've said, well, how engaged are the sales team, people selling us this kit, and is this solution GDPR compliant? All very much made up data, so don't take it personally. Now, I look at this, and very simply, this isn't a model, this isn't sophisticated, this is just a binary yes-no answer. Yes, it's compliant, no, it's not. And very quickly, what we can see from here is the ones that are compliant and the ones that are not. So we just select the 3 that actually have the 3 yeses. So those are the 3 options I'm going to progress with in my model. And you'll see right away I've halved the amount of assessment we have to do if we just put all 7 into the model straight away. Now I'm going to use this set status button in order to push them along that Kanban, and I'm going to move them into gating factors. So you'll see now I've now got 3 alternatives in my gating factors stage, and I'm ready to move into my AHP model in order to come up with a more sophisticated set of assessment criteria in order to pick a winner. So this is a very simplified view of the problem, but any problem can be broken down with the right clustering methodology, the right level of detail, the right number of iterations with stakeholders. So here, very simply, I'm just looking for the upstream connection, the downstream connection, and I'm looking for a kind of an element of partnership and thought leadership from the chosen provider I select. With all these high-level objectives, obviously they're quite woolly, quite broad, so I've then put much more specific criteria underneath that will allow my assessors to score the 3 options against the criteria. Moving on to my scales, I'm going to use panel-based assessment for all my criteria, so it's survey-based rather than attribute-based. But I've tried to customize most of these scales in order to make them much more specific to the thing I'm trying to measure. So a good example here is the migration effort around current integrations. So if I click on this, you can see I've tried to quantify the amount of effort each solution will take in order to deliver that migration. So I've said, that the worst score is it takes more than 8 weeks. So that drops to a 5. So there's a very small contribution. The flip side is if I've got a magic plug and play option, it's a week. So that becomes a very strong solution against that criteria. And just to pick another one, this is about training and user support. So again, I've come up with a sort of scale that implies I've got some standards written down elsewhere outside the model. And the question is, does my alternative meet that or fail to deliver that? In this case, it's a 0 if it's got 0 support, right through to 100 if it covers all your stretch criteria. So it does everything you wanted to perfectly. Next, I've loaded in some respondents. So these are people who are going to participate in taking the surveys and ultimately do the work of assessing the alternatives in this level of detail. What I've done here is put them in buckets. So I've got some analysts, some data engineers, and some leadership roles. So you'll see how we aggregate those together in order to complement each other's knowledge and skill set and produce that really rounded, team-based approach that we've talked about in the white paper. So if you're familiar with AHP, you understand that having built a hierarchy of criteria, we then go through a pairwise review process in order to weight those criteria and determine which are the least important that's going to drive the quantification of our model. So the way that works, I've set up an opinion panel here. I'm just going to click on this one and you can see it in action. So pairwise is very simple. It's basically what's more important. In this case, the ability to connect to a third-party data solution versus connectivity to downstream solutions, both obviously critical components within a data warehouse functionality. Now, the way this works, you can score it by clicking here, and then using a classic sort of 9-point SATI scale, you're able to determine the strength of preference between the two options, or indeed to call them as equal importance. Here you'll see I've actually scored this already. So I've got a breadth of opinion, and this just goes to show, this is all dummy data, but even the dummy data shows the reality, that you get this broad array of perspectives back when you give people questions. And this is the essence of syndicating knowledge, reducing noise, and coming up with a good collective team perspective on what matters most. And the idea is, behind this level of disagreement, you've got conversations, you've got discussions about points of view, you've got the ability to change votes, you've got the ability to listen to your colleagues in a way that really frames the challenge around the facts and the delivery of value against criteria, and hopefully keeps it nice and neutral, and it's not about personality wars or shouting loudest in a room. So we've gone through our process, we've aggregated, we've reduced noise, and we come up with a set of weights. So this is a percentage normalized distribution over 100 that splits that vote up at that top level and then at the lower level. And if you've got a very complicated criteria, because you're buying something incredibly complicated, you'll find you've got a lot of these sub-criteria, and gut checking the outcome is a really important step in making sure you've got a quality decision. Next, we're going to score the alternatives, and if you remember, we only had 3 alternatives, so we're going to just focus on those because we got rid of a few of the gating factors. But now we're going to use the fact that we've got these engineers, the analysts, and the leadership team, and they're going to do a slightly different job. So what we've done is divide the criteria differently amongst them. So the idea is we're going to be able to get the experts to provide their expert judgment on what they know about best. So I've got the engineers looking at some of the technical components. I've got the leadership team looking at some of the sort of more strategic elements, and the analysts looking at the downstream applications. This will look very similar to your pairwise review, except now instead of using the kind of the 2 options, we're going to use that scale that we looked at before. So we're going to measure how well, in this case, the Google large query performs against the context of flexibility to add new data sources. How good is it? And you'll just come up with that view on that, in this case, 0 through 100 scale, and that will generate its score. And again, you can see we've got the ability to survey multiple people, have them debate, have them aggregate, and ultimately settle on an agreed outcome for this particular question. And there's some really important functionality built in here as well, particularly around things like disagreements. So again, you can zoom in on areas of divergence between your scorers. And what we hear all the time from clients is, this is great because we don't waste time chatting about everything we agree on. We can actually focus on where we disagree and get much better value for the time we're spending in discussion by understanding and solving those points of divergence. So everyone's had a go at scoring, and it's rolled together, and you come up with this number between 0 and 100, which represents the value score of the different alternatives. You can drill into this in terms of going down to sub-criteria. You can see the source of value. We've got comparison capabilities here, so we highlight some options, and we can look at it in greater detail. We can look at sensitivity analysis to understand exposure to a given element within the hierarchy and see which options have a higher beta against the different criteria weights. Lots of different flexibility, so you can really understand your decision as well as coming to an aggregated score outcome. So if you recall, it's the Google and the Microsoft elements or options that came out head and shoulders above. So I'm happy to push those along my Kanban, and we're going to leave the IBM RAIN cloud behind because it didn't pass muster in terms of the AHP model assessment. That then means I can put a final assessment through on these last 2 options. Now, for the last 2 options, I'm going to reintroduce some new data. So again, I'm going to introduce cost and risk. So I'm going to collect the cost for the different options. I'm going to ask the different stakeholders to provide a very light touch review on risks concerns relating to those 2 options. This could be another AHP model if you wanted to go into risk in greater detail, and obviously some very technical purchases or decisions need that level of scrutiny. So we're now able to go into the final risk assessment and selection process. You'll see I've got my 2 options here. I've put a cost in against the 2 options. That generates a value for money score. So here you can see the Microsoft Sparkle just edges it in terms of offering better value because its value is similar in terms of its contribution, but it's a little bit cheaper. On the flip side, my confidence level in terms of the risk assessment, actually, the Google large query comes out a little bit higher. So I had a little bit of concern expressed by one of my stakeholder groups. And that's the basis of your final decision. Here, you've got that little bit of a choice between better value for money on one hand and slightly lower risk on the other. So our advice here would be scrutinize those risks, see if you can do anything to mitigate them, determine how much you care about value, how much you budget constrained versus how much have you got that flexibility to trade up to the slightly safer option. And these are the kind of options we hope to help you make. Simple, rational decisions that will help you pick a winner brilliantly. Thank you very much. If you've enjoyed watching this, get in touch and we'd love to see if we can help you solve your problem around picking a winner. Thank you.